Hello and welcome to this short information video on how to repair the electric tailgate lock motor on the Astra H series 2004 through to 2010 and the Zafira B series 2006 through to 2011. This is the boot lock actuator assembly that's supplied by General Motors for the Astra H and Zafira B series. It's sold as a complete assembly and costs around £50, 70 or 80 euros, and its part number is clearly identified as 13126497. The Achilles heel of this assembly is the actuator motor itself, and we'll be looking how to repair the motor which is inside the actuator assembly. The motor itself is a flat type motor by Mabuchi. There are a lot of identical looking motors available, many with different electrical characteristics, shaft sizes, brush types, even the contacts and the direction in which the shaft turns. By far the most common problem is where the brushes burn out. You can see the black carbon deposits clearly visible through the casing, and the brushes will be badly burnt or worn inside. What this video will do is show you how to get hold of a replacement motor at a fraction of the cost of the complete actuator assembly. It will also show you how to fit the motor to the existing brass worm gear. Let's start by removing the lid off the actuator assembly. There are 4 retaining clips on the lid. These can be undone by using a small bladed screwdriver. With the lid removed, you can see the internal workings and how the catch is operated by the manual lever or by the motor. With the boot in the open position, the catch presses against the switch which stops the motor from working. To remove the motor from the assembly without breaking any of the other components, we're going to position the actuator so that the actuator body can move away from the metal assembly. Simulate a boot closed with a screwdriver. This forces the catch over to the switch and allows the motor to be turned manually. Turn the motor until the lip on the cog is in a horizontal position. This will allow the assembly to slide away from the metal body. Next, press the retaining clip that allows the metal body to separate from the actuator assembly. There is also a spring. The spring presses against the catch on the left hand side. Position that over a little clip to hold the spring back, and the 2 assemblies should pull apart. Next, remove the white plastic pinion gear and release the motor using the screwdriver. Before you remove the brass worm, be sure to measure the motor accurately. Measure from the flat surface, excluding the bearing protrusion, to the tip of the motor shaft. You should find this equals exactly 59 mm. Also, measure between the brass worm and the motor, that should be 4 mm, and between the brass worm and the tip of the shaft, that also should be 4 mm. In this section what we're going to do is replace a faulty motor, and we're going to do that by attaching a new motor to the existing brass worm gear. Now, the brass worm gear and the motor are both proprietary to Vauxhall, so you're not going to be able to get either on the open market. You're going to have to manufacture them yourself. But what we're going to do is fit a new motor to the existing worm gear, and we're going to achieve this by cutting the shaft where it's nearest to the motor and then knocking the shaft back through. And the reason we're going to do that is because the shaft is a 2mm shaft which goes through the brass worm gear, which has got a 2mm hole in it, and the only reason it actually doesn't slip is because there is a small spline that you can't see underneath the brass gear near most of the motor. So when we actually cut the shaft through, we've got to knock the shaft back through the brass gear in the direction back towards the motor to get that spline out first. You can't knock it back through the other way, and we'll see that in a minute. So what we're going to do is cut the shaft immediately behind the brass worm gear near most of the motor. If you drill a 2mm hole in a piece of wood and then put the brass gear on it, you can knock the shaft through, exposing the spline end of the shaft. If you then get a small punch, or indeed the end of the motor you've just cut off, and give it a helping hand, you can push it just a little bit further, and then you'll see how easy the actual shaft slides out of the worm gear. It is a loose fit without that spline. So what we have is the motor, the severed shaft with the spline at the very end, and the brass worm gear, which is now detached. The next thing to do is to just saw the spline bit of the shaft off, and that will leave us with a little bit of shaft that we're going to use to reattach to the worm gear at the end opposite to the motor on the new assembly. Here you can see I've severed off the spline end of the shaft, and we can dispose of that because we're going to use the larger bit that's remaining to insert that back into the worm gear, and that will support the motor when it's put back into the assembly. You can use Loctite to fix the shaft back into the worm gear, and what we've done here is we've inserted it back into the shaft so it protrudes exactly 4mm, which is our original measurement, and what we've also done is put the shaft into the opposite end from where it came. The end you see here is the end where the motor was, and the reason for that is that the splines have done some damage and it's a little looser, and we want the best bond to be at the end where the motor is. The new motor has a much shorter shaft than the original motor, and what we're going to do is use Loctite 638 green and attach the motor back to the worm gear. Now you've got approximately 30 seconds in order to do this, because when this stuff bonds, it bonds, and so you've got to get that 4mm gap set up and your overall length of 59mm back from now. And you see it's already got a reasonably firm grip. So let's fit the motor back to the assembly. Reassembly of the actuator is the reverse of what you've already seen. Make sure that the two connectors of the motor are face down. Reintroduce the plastic worm gear with the lip in the position that allows the two assemblies to clip together, and make sure the spring is still behind the clip. Slide the two units together and press the plastic ward through the clip that holds the two units firmly together. Now you have to manually turn the motor to complete the operational cycle of the actuator assembly. You have to put the clip back into its position to keep the lever in its rightmost position, and then if you cycle the motor all the way through to the boot open position, when the motor reaches the end stop, you see the levers just come over to the right hand side and then it'll butt up against the end stop there. If you then, as before, simulate a boot closed event with the screwdriver and then wind it through one more cycle, the assembly will be in a position where you can put the lid on and fix it back to the vehicle. The cycle will be complete when the lever flicks over to the right hand side and then the lip on the gear pushes up against the end stop, as you can see there, and the striker plate is in the position you see. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video useful and saves you both time and money. A kit containing the motor and a small tube of Loctite 638 green is available on the website shown.